नामाचार्य श्रील ठाकुर प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम राधा कुंद गिरि गोवर्धन वृंदावन धाम की जय, ज्योति मायापुर धाम की जय, गंगा देवी की जय, यमुना मई की जय, भक्ति देवी की जय, तुलसी महारानी की जय, समवेत भक्त वृंद की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, तांडराचार्य विस्कान श्री प्रभुपाद की जय, गौ प्रेमानंदे all glory to the all glory to all glory all glory to okay. ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवति उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी कृष्णे स्वधामोपगते धर्मज्ञानादिभिः सह कलौ नष्टदृशामेष पुराणार्कोऽधुनोदितः Grantaraj Shrimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 6, entitled Conversation between Narad and Vyasdeva. Today we'll begin with text number 11. Please repeat. Sphitan Janapadan Tatra Pura Grama Vraja Akaran Kheta Khadavata Vati Cha Vanani Upavanani Cha Sphitan Janapadan Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Khadavata Vananyupavanani cha Sphitan Janapadan Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Khadavata Vananyupavanani cha Sphitan Janapadan Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Khadavata Vananyupavanani cha Sphitam Janapadan Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Khadavata Vananyupavanani cha Sphitan Janapadan Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Karvatavatischa Vananyupavanani cha Spitanjanapadamstatra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Karvatavatischa Vananyupavanani cha Spitanjanapadamstatra Puragrama Vrajakaran Kheta Karvatavatischa Vananyupavanani cha Spitan, very flourishing. Janapadan, metropolises. Tatra, there. Pura, towns. Grama, villages. Vraja, big farms. Akaran, mineral fields. Mines. Keta, agricultural lands. Karvata, valleys. Vati, flower gardens. Cha, and. Vanani, forests. Upavanani, nursery gardens. Cha, and. Translation by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. After my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, animal farms, mines, agricultural lands, valleys, flower gardens, nursery gardens, and natural forests. Please repeat. After my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, animal farms, mines, agricultural lands, valleys, flower gardens, nursery gardens, and natural forests. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Man's activities in agriculture, mining, farming, industries, gardening, etc., were all on the same scale as they are now, even previous to the present creation, and the same activities will remain as they are, even in the next creation. After many hundreds of millions of years, one creation is started by the law of nature, and the history of the universe repeats itself practically in the same way. The mundane wranglers waste time with archaeological excavations without searching into the vital necessities of life. After getting an impetus in spiritual life, Sri Narad Muni, even though a mere child, did not waste time for a single moment with economic development. Although he passed towns and villages, mines and industries, he continually went on to progressive spiritual emancipation. Shrimad Bhagavatam is the repetition of history which happened some hundreds of millions of years ago. As it was said herein before, only the most important factors of history are picked up to be recorded in this transcendental literature. Om Ajnanatimirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakaramaham Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yutaparakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Spitan Janapadan Statra Puragrama Vrajakaran Keta Karavata Vatischa Vanani Upavanani Cha. Okay.
So Hare Krishna, I just thought I'll give a short introduction about Mukunda Datta Prabhu. So he joined in the LA temple and then served in the Radha Damodar party, the Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And then also served as a pujari and a Gurukul teacher. And he studied languages such as Sanskrit, Bengali, and even Hindi dialects like Braj Bhasha. And he joined Gopi Paranadana Prabhu, ISKCON's greatest scholars, in 2001, the late Gopi Paranadana Prabhu, in Govardhan, where he worked with him on Jiva Goswami's Bhagavad Sandarbha, Rupa Goswami's Laghu Bhagavatamrita, and was also very instrumental in the publication of the Brihad Bhagavatamrita. The BBT was brought out. Prabhu is also working, so he's working on the 6 Sandarbhas, of which I'm not sure how many have been published already.
Bhagavad just finished.
Okay.
So Paramatma's next.
Okay.
Actually, we're working on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu right now.
Right, so that's another major multi-volume project. He's working on the translation of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, original. Prabhupada presented the Nectar of Devotion, which is a summary study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And Mukunda Datta Prabhu is bringing out a complete Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu of Rupa Goswami. So he's a very proficient scholar. And we're very, very thankful that he agreed to give us this association and let us take maximum advantage of this association.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Translation. After my departure, I passed through many flourishing metropolises, towns, villages, animal farms, mines, agricultural lands, valleys, flower gardens, nursery gardens, and natural forests. We're going to consider a few points about commentaries in general, Sanskrit commentaries on works like the Shrimad Bhagavatam, and in particular about those who were commenting on this verse. That would be Sridhar Swami. Jiva Goswami doesn't comment on this verse. Vishwanath Chakravarti says almost identically the same thing as Sridhar Swami. But before we do that, and then of course we'll be in a better position to look at Srila Prabhupada's purport. But before we do that, we can consider what are some of the characteristics of Sanskrit commentaries in general. It's said that a commentary should do 5 things. Paracheda, where do you break up the words? When you're looking at a Sanskrit word, many times the words are all stuck together because of what they call euphonic combination, sandhi. So you have to know how to break it up. For example, in the Upadeshamrita, we have niyamagraha. Does it mean niyama agraha, failure to accept? Or does it mean niyama agraha, too much emphasis on accepting the rules and regulations? Only from commentaries do we know the difference. So that's one function. Paracheda, padarthoktir, and it tells us also what is the meaning of the word. And then we have how to construe the sentence and how to break up compounds and understand compounds. For example, in this verse we have Janapadan. That's a combination of Jana and Pada. So a place, Pada means a place or a situation where there are many people. Janapadan. So like this. So we break up words, we understand what is the meaning of the sentence, we break up the compounds. We're looking at how to understand the sentence. And finally, akshepeshu samadhanam means resolution of any doubts that may arise in regards to what's being stated. So those are 5 functions that our traditional commentary in Sanskrit should fill. And in this verse, we find that mostly the commentators are simply saying, what do the words mean? How do they break up and what do they mean? It might seem like it's not very important why we have to know what is the distinction between a town and a village, for example, but especially because it's being translated into English, it's a good thing to take note of. He says, first of all, Spitan. Spitan, Srila Prabhupada translates as very flourishing. This is because Sridhar Swami has given his definition of Spitan, which means samriddhan, means the same thing. Janapadan means deshan. Janapada, according to Sridhar Swami, means a country. So Narad Muni passed through many countries, and he saw many things that were flourishing, tatra, therein. And Pura Grama Vraja Akaran, 4 more things. Pura Grama Vraja Akaran. Pura means the capital city of a place. And Grama, he's quoting from Bhrigu, Viprascha viprapratyascha yatra chaiva vasanti te satu grama iti proktaha shudranam vasa evacha. A place where many Brahmins live, and the followers of those Brahmins live there, and you know, somebody has to take out the trash, so a place where all the Shudras are also living there, this is called a grama. Vraja means Gokulani, Gokula, a house for a cow, cow pen. Goshta, another word is used. So we have agricultural, Prabhupada translates here it as animal farms. Not exactly, we're not farming animals, but it's a place where we keep the animals safely. Nowadays you have to point that out because people farm animals for the purpose of eating animals. In fact, people even farm human beings for the purpose of selling their organs as well. This is a multinational, multi-million-dollar business, but it's all underground. Just like the slave trade, what is it, $30 billion a year is generated in human trafficking. When I was coming here from Atlanta, in the airport they were making all kinds of announcement. This airport takes human trafficking very seriously, so if you see something suspicious, say something. If you see something, say something. And this is considered to be a human society that we live in. It's not the kind of human society that I care to live in, but this is what we've done with our world. So, Janapadam, these things generally happen in big places where many, many people congregate, such as New York City. And Spitan, Samriddhan, it's flourishing. It's not exactly flourishing. What does Srila Prabhupada say elsewhere in the first canto about this? America is considered to be a place of opulence. But what does he say about that? Anybody know? It's flourishing on what? Flourishing on misdeeds only. Yes. So we can throw money at a problem and make it look as if things are okay. But actually, it's really not okay. The way that we live in this world, put it this way. How many people, raise your hand if you know someone who's had cancer. Yeah, almost everybody raises their hand. 30 years ago in India, nobody ever heard of cancer. And now if you ask this question, every third person will raise his hand because he knows. So either he's had cancer himself or he knows somebody who's had cancer. That means something about the way that we're living and something about the lifestyle that we've, within the last 30 years, exported to India
It's killing us. It gives us cancer. So we're not actually thriving. But you've got a big multinational racket that, called the medical industry and the insurance industry, and all these people work together. And you can make it look as if things are flourishing. All right, well anyway, that's grama. Vraja, Gokulani, that's the place where the cows are kept. Akara, Ratnadyutpatti sthanani, tan. He says the definition of akara means a place where jewels are produced. What do we call that? Prabhupada puts it very simply in parentheses. Mines, mineral fields. Keta, that is agricultural lands. That's actually farm that you're tilling and using for crops. Karavata, valleys, Prabhupada translates it. There's no word in English for this, so maybe that's the best word he could find. There are many cases like this. We don't really have a word in English because we don't have the conception in English. For example, dharma. What does the word dharma mean? Dharma.
Occupational duty.
Occupational duty. Anything else?
Religion.
Religion. What else? We've got two different things. One is your occupation, one is your religion. And? Huh? The intrinsic property of a thing, lakshana, swarupa. This is also dharma. I went through Prabhupada's books once out of curiosity to see how is he translating this. I found 24 different definitions of the word. What do you do with that if you don't know Sanskrit? It's not so easy. So Prabhupada does the best that you can do with the English language, but the problem is the English language is insufficient for expressing these concepts. For example, in Sanskrit, how do you say blue light or transgendered in Sanskrit?
Okay.
No, you don't have the concept, therefore you don't have the word. You can't say human trafficking in Sanskrit because it doesn't exist in Sanskrit. So similarly, we don't have a word for dharma in English because we don't have the conception of dharma that requires us to use a word for it. If we don't have the conception, then you don't require the word. So this is the problem, and therefore our so-called flourishing janapadas, flourishing metropolises, they're actually thriving on misdeeds only, because if you don't have dharma, what is your only other alternative? There's only two things. If it's not dharma, then it is adharma. And this is what Prabhupada says. All right, so Narad Muni is going through all these places. Vrajakaran, here it says, mines, very simply put. And then he says, Keta, Karshaka Grama. It may be even a village, not just a field itself, but a village of farmers. Sometimes in some places in the world still, we have villages where people are farming, believe it or not. In fact, that's where your food comes from. It doesn't actually come from the corner grocery store. I don't know where you shop here, but there must be somebody nearby who's selling. And so there are trucks delivering this. As soon as those trucks are threatened, then you all starve. Because what are you going to do in the middle of Manhattan if there's no delivery? It's like in Japan, there's one island off the coast of Japan, and there's no natural resources at all. Everything they have to get from the mainland. They have to get their water, they have to get their food, they have to get everything from the mainland. Artificial economy, Prabhupada says. So, all right. Kardavata, this is my point. This is a word that Prabhupada says valleys, but actually according to Sridhar Swami it means Giri Tata Grama, a village that is at the foot of a mountain. Just like there's a Braj Bhasha Bhajan. Shri Govardhana ki tareti rehiye. Shri Govardhana ki rehiye. I want to live in the foot of Govardhan Hill. Tareti. So Kardavata is the word for that. And then again he quotes the same thing from some Bhrigu. Ekato yatra tu gramo nagaram chaikata hastitam mishram tu karvatam nama nadi giri samashriyam. If you have a small town, or grama, we can say, how do we define grama? A place where there are Brahmins living. If there's no Brahmins living there, it's not yet considered to be a village. The Brahmins are there, their servants are there, the Shudras are also there. Like this. This is an interesting point because in previous times, sometimes these villages were a little bit segregated. Still it's like this in India. You go to one village, the whole village is converted to Christianity en masse. You can't find any Brahmins there anymore. And you go someplace else and it's all, Sikhs. And you go someplace else and it's all Catholics or Hindus, etc. All right, so Giri Tata or Nadi. Nadi Giri Samashrayam. A village that has taken shelter of either a river or a hill. Why would you want to take shelter of a river? It's pretty obvious. You have to drink water. Why would you want to take shelter of a hill? Handaya madrida bala haridasa varya. Anybody know the verse? Yadrama Krishna charanas parasha pramoda manam tanoti sahago ganayostayor yat pani yasuya vasakandara kandamulaihi. That means, Krishna says, or in the 10th canto it said, we want to take shelter of Giridhaj Govardhan Hill because this Govardhan Hill is supplying everything that we need. All the fruits and the trees and the grasses for the cows and everything that we require is coming actually from Govardhan Hill, not from your corner supermarket. Keep it in mind, just in case. So, that's Karavata. And what else do we have here? Vati. Sridhar Swami, oh yeah, he is given it. Okay, so he says here, Vati is a place where they're growing flowers, flower gardens. Here in America, flowers are not really very much valued. In India, there are flowers everywhere, and therefore flowers are readily available. They're very cheap. Here in America, you have to pay $20 to buy one rose. Because people don't value flowers enough that they actually prioritize the cultivation of flowers. But flowers, for a godly society, flowers are very important. Why? Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo me bhaktya prayachati. These are among the things that Krishna likes. Krishna likes certain things and Krishna doesn't like other things because Krishna is a person. This is a thing we have to get. I remember when we first translated Prabhupada's books into Chinese language, there was a problem. Can you imagine what the problem is?
There's no word for God.
There's no word for God in the Chinese language. Why? Because there's no conception of God that requires that word. Just like there's no word for dharma in English, we're kind of close. So it's the same problem. So, what do you do with it? In the beginning they had to say like Emperor in Heaven or Supreme Father, Heavenly Father or something like that. So anyhow, if they finally got it after 30 years, they have some idea of, they can just write Krishna now in Chinese. So somebody invented a character, I guess. But gardens of flowers are important because we're thinking of God. And these are the things that God likes. So that's called a vati. And what else do we have? Vana. What is a vana?
Forest.
Yeah, forest, groups of trees that by themselves just sprout. Nobody's cultivating. This is the difference between vana and upavana. Upavana means a cultivated garden, a formal garden, we say in English. A garden that certain things go certain places, and it's the. Yeah, no, an orchard would be the.
Flowers.
Yeah, you can say that also. I think so. You can say trees. Yeah, you can say that. Orchard is good. Prabhupada says what? Nursery gardens. Yeah, so we have, nurseries, you have trees. So vana means it's in a wild state, many things are growing there. Forest, woods, wilderness. And upavana means a cultivated garden where it's, everything is in its place by your will. So this is another thing we can meditate on for a moment. Prakrita and Sanskrita. These two words are there in Sanskrit. What does Prakrita mean? Sometimes we hear Prakrita Sahajya. What does it mean? Prakrita.
Tainted by material desire. Material.
Mundane.
Mundane.
Yeah. So actually Prakrita means uncultivated, wild, natural. Prakrita, because it comes from what word? What word for nature? Prakriti, yes. Therefore, Prakrita means it's, just let it go wild like your lawn. If you don't mow New York City, you don't have lawns, but if you had lawns in New York City and you let them go wild, then that would be considered Prakrita. And on the other hand, what would Sanskrita be? Think samskara, refinement, purification. See, the language is Prakrita, ordinary conventional language that we all decide by, mutual consensus what words mean. This is where the French postmodernists have fun. They like to say that everything is relative, has no meaning really. There's whatever we decide, it's okay. So that's one thing. But Sanskriti or samskara, to undergo the process of refinement, just like in human society we have how many samskars? At least a dozen or so. And a person who undergoes these kinds of reformatory rituals, that person becomes purified in his body and in his mind, and therefore in his spiritual endeavors. It's very beneficial for that reason. And a whole society of people who have undergone samskara, that society is called, what is the word for society in Hindi? Do you have it? Maybe in Tamil, I don't know. Samskriti. Samskriti, which is also a Sanskrit word. Just like Prakriti, Prakrita. Sanskriti, Sanskrita. So you have the language which has undergone a great deal of refinement. That is Sanskrit language. Now, why am I saying all this? Vana represents the natural Prakrita state. Upavana means the cultivated state. This distinction is always there in a human society. If we don't undergo this sort of refinement as human beings, then we remain animals, virtual animals. Prakrita, wild, uncultivated, unkempt, as it were. So, therefore, the Hitopadesh tells us, and Srila Prabhupada is constantly quoting, Dharmasya hina pashubhi samana. Without dharma, a human being is a virtual animal, the same as an animal, no difference. Why? Because Srila Prabhupada used to say, I believe he said it here in New York, the dogs and cats are running around on four legs, and what are they after? Eating, sleeping, mating, defending. Because if you want to eat, sleep, and mate, then you have to fight, because other people are going to encroach in your space. That's why they spray paint all the walls in New York City. It's like a dog urinating on a tree. You have to mark your turf so that the other guy doesn't come and sell his drugs where you want to sell them. He told me yesterday they called this Sugar Hill because they were selling so much, crack cocaine or something. My God. And this is considered to be a human society. So, dharmasya hina pashupisamana. Unless we undergo these samskars, unless we refine our character, and ultimately unless we take to the supreme manifestation of dharma, what is the word for this in Shrimad Bhagavatam in this very first canto? Think chapter 2. No. Parodharma. Parodharma means the supreme dharma. All these other dharmas are only meant to prepare us to come to this stage. If you're having trouble coming to this stage, think about what you're doing, how you're eating, how you're sleeping, how you're mating, how you're defending. Srila Prabhupada was discussing this on, I think it was February 14th, 1977, among many disciples who were frankly arguing with him. And they were expressing real doubts. And Srila Prabhupada said, because in the last 3 years that Srila Prabhupada was with us, he gave about 80% of his instructions on the topic of Varnashram Dharma, which is basically the same endeavor to self-purification. He increasingly, very pointedly and urgently, Srila Prabhupada is emphasizing this to whom? To the initiated membership of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And he realized that they had some doubts about it. What are some of those doubts? Well, eto bahya. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told Ramananda Roy, no, this thing is external. You don't have to worry. It's not so important. But eating is also external. Sleeping is external. Are you eating?
Yes, sir.
Are you sleeping?
Yes, sir.
Raise your hand if you haven't slept for this year. Right. So we have to. Krishna tells us at the end of chapter 7 of Bhagavad Gita, Yesham those who are pure in their habits. That means pure in their eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. In other words, they're punya karmanam. They're engaged in, what does karma mean? Activity in general, but there are three options with regard to action, according to chapter 3. One of them is karma, the other one is vikarma, and the third one is akarma. Yes. So if you're not engaged in karma, then you're engaged in vikarma. In exactly the same way that if you're not engaged in dharma, then you're engaged in adharma. And it's very difficult to employ adharma or vikarma in Krishna consciousness. Why? Because there's really no such thing as vikarma yoga. There's only karma yoga. So a person has to follow this instruction at the end of chapter 7 and purify his mundane activities. And Krishna says, when a person does that, what is the result? What does the rest of the verse say? One who has acted piously in this life and in previous lives.
They worship Krishna with Dridavata.
Why do they worship Krishna with a mature, sustainable commitment to pure devotional service? Huh?
Because their sins are eradicated.
You have to get line 3. What is it? Te dvanva moha nirmukta. They become freed from the bewilderment of dualities. The things that snag us all and hang us up and push us down and, impel us to do stupid things. This is called dvanva moha. And we're all infected by that. So this is Krishna's advice, and for that reason, we can assume this is why Srila Prabhupada was pushing on this point. But this is all off of this distinction between Prakrita culture and Samskrita culture. That is to say, a wild state and a refined state. This is what comes to me, at least, when I listen to these words Vanani and Upavanani and consider the distinction given by both Sridhar Swami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur between those two. Now, what does Srila Prabhupada say about all this? First of all, right off the bat, he said, people, there's nothing new here. This is his first point, if you're reading between the lines. Listen closely. Man's activities in agriculture, mining, farming, industries, gardening, etc. were all on the same scale as they are now, even previous to the present creation, and the same activities will remain as they are, even in the next creation. So there's nothing new. Srila Prabhupada used to say this all the time, actually. Nothing is new. Everything is going on again and again and again. Every generation comes up. How many people here are... Everybody here over 20, I think, right? I wasn't 20 when I joined ISKCON, that's why I'm asking. Everybody here below 30, or some people over 30 here? All right. Yes, yeah. He doesn't count. So, young people, they don't understand certain things. They have to get experiences that, we all go through experiences in life, and then we get it after some time, unless we're just really dull, and there are some people who just never get it no matter what also. But if you're of average intelligence, there are certain lessons that you get after a while through experience, but young people don't have this kind of experience. And therefore they assume that whatever's in front of me now, this is all like brand new and very special and unprecedented and wonderful, and we should get excited about this. And, old people who actually know better, even if they do know better, even the people who aren't fools but actually do know better, they don't care to disabuse these young people of that illusion. Why? Because they've got a motive. Madison Avenue. You cannot have a satisfied society in a society that privileges rampant capitalism as much as ours does. You have to keep people agitated. What is the best process for that? The kalpa vriksha of the material world. It's also a highly addicting drug. It's intended to induce what Devamarita Swami calls mass consensual trance. Mass consensual trance. I mean, I was in the airport yesterday, and just looking around, all the people in the departure lounge, every single one of them was like this, completely absorbed in samadhi for a while. The sense objects, these things bewilder us like anything, but a wise person is like the ocean. What does Krishna say at the end of chapter? Yes. So just like the ocean, so many things are coming, and he doesn't get moved by it. And an older person should become like this if he's thoughtful and intelligent. So this is the Prabhupada's first point. Then, after many millions of years, one creation is started by the law of nature, and the history of the universe repeats itself in practically the same way. So nothing is new, not only in terms of, what's available, but in terms of what's happening also. It happens again and again and again. This is, of course, Nitya Leela Hoti Hai. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he ate the rice of this itinerant Brahmin who was worshipping him in the form of Gopal, 3 times he took his rice, and after the 3rd time he revealed himself to this Brahmin, and this Brahmin was astonished. What did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu say? Does anybody know?
Don't tell anyone.
Yeah, aside from that.
You're calling me, so I came.
You're calling me, so I came. Anything else? He said something that you would easily miss it.
Worshipping me life after life.
Yes. This is going on every time. You're coming and offering me this rice. Every time I'm eating, I remember, you don't remember. That is the difference between us and God. So this, even in the Lord's Leela, it happens like this, but certainly in the material world. Now, in Rupa Goswami's Bhagavat Sandarbha, which I just finished editing, he explains that in different creations, even in different kalpas, what to speak of different, whole creations, basically the same incarnations come again and again, and they take very similar, if not the same forms. One exception to this he gives is Narasimhadev. Did you all know about this? Anybody read Lagu Bhagavatamritam? No, this is actually, I'm sorry, it's not Bhagavat Sandarbha, it's Lagu Bhagavatamritam. Sometimes Lord Narasimhadev comes in a different form, not half man, half lion. Sometimes he comes in the form of a cat.
Cat.
Whether that's a big cat or a small cat, I can't say, but that's what it says. Cat. Yeah. So, but generally the Lord comes at the same time every time, in the same form, recognizable. No, this is why we say, you can't just claim to be an incarnation; it has to be mentioned in the Shastra. Giriraj Swami gives a very nice analogy about this. Just like, do you have Kmarts in Manhattan?
Yes.
So if you go into a Kmart, you're going to get basically the same stock of items in every single Kmart outlet, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're going to get them organized more or less in the same order as well. Automotive is over here, Home Depot, whatever is, all these things. But depending on the physical facilities of that particular building, it may be tweaked a little bit, so it won't be exactly the same. In this way, the creation is playing itself out again and again and again in every age. Now, why are those little small differences there? Because we're the ones who are, in effect, necessitating this material world to begin with. And depending on the configuration, if you will, of jivas who are coming at any given time, the Lord has to tweak things a little bit. So this is going on again and again. Prabhupada explains here. Now, 3rd sentence, he says, the mundane wranglers waste time with archaeological excavations without searching into the vital necessities of life. A couple of things here. Number 1, archaeological excavations means any big project that you may take up in life. He's just using this as an analogy, particularly aiming at the speculators who try to explain everything without reference to God. But then he says, more important than that is to search into the vital necessities of life. Vital necessities of the life. What are the vital necessities of life, aside from air?
Roti kapda makan.
I'm very sensitive about this because I have so many respiratory difficulties, and in Vrindavan, if you go to Vrindavan in April, even if you don't get asthma, you will get asthma. Because not only it's a combination of pollution and dust, and then natural dust, then construction dust, artificial dust, including metal particulates, and then pollution and pollens as well, it makes it very hard. So aside from water and air and food and shelter, what are the vital necessities of life? Think about it. Huh?
Clothing.
I can't hear you.
Clothing.
Clothing, okay. What else?
Rain.
Grain. You have to high, people. Think high. What is the really vital?
Emotional satisfaction.
Emotional. Yo.
Devotion. Education.
Religion.
Dharma. And especially parodharma. Because what is all this for? Okay, I'm comfortable now, but where's it going? I'm going to die in 10 years, right? So I'm comfortable. I've got all the money I need. I've got the grains. I've got the clothing. I've got a nice shelter. I've got enough to eat. Air is okay, somewhat. Water is okay, somewhat. I can get by. But why? Why get by? What are you here for? This is the vital necessity of life. Because only you can ask this question. The animals cannot inquire like this. You can bring dogs and cats into this room for this class, but they're not going to get a thing. Mm-hmm. You can bring people into this room who are too impious. They're also not going to get anything out of it. They just won't hear. They can't. So, these are two things, and then Prabhupada continues. Fourth sentence. After getting an impetus in spiritual life, Narad Muni, even though a mere child, did not waste time for a single moment with economic development, although he passed towns and villages, mines, and industries. In other words, there are different kinds of people in this world, and some people's minds, when they see a virgin forest, for example, they can only think in terms of lumber. They can only think in terms of development. How much money can I get from this? You see? Somebody sees the Yamuna, he sees a goddess. Somebody sees the Yamuna, he sees something to quench my thirst. Somebody else sees the Yamuna, and he thinks, here's a hydroelectric dam project. You see? So there are different kinds of people. And notably, Narad Muni is not the kind of person who would become agitated by all the sensory items that he encounters. We'll get to that in a moment. And he didn't waste time because even though he was only a child, he was focused on self-realization. He continually went on to progressive spiritual emancipation. Shrimad Bhagavatam is the repetition of history which happened some hundreds of millions of years ago. As was said herein before, only the most important factors of history are picked up to be recorded in this transcendental literature. So because this literature is transcendental, we're not going to concern ourselves too much with who ate what where, how did he sleep over there, who fought who where. If you read a mundane history, what is it full of? Mainly political and economic history. Because this is the consciousness of the persons who write these textbooks. This is the consciousness of the persons who fund the schools that order the textbooks. And this is the consciousness of the students who are trying to get a job to fill their belly and enjoy sex. So, Shrimad Bhagavatam, as like Narad Muni, is concerned about the vital necessities of life. And therefore only those aspects of history which are relevant to this higher aim of parodharma. These things are mentioned in the Bhagavatam, but always in regards to spiritual advancement. So, Sridhar Swami in his commentary, he points out that while wandering through all these places, Narad Muni, the next 4 verses, he points out, are talking about Narad Muni's experience, and what is the reason for his experience? Nana guna dosha yukteshu samadrishti sangatoham iti tatparyaha. The idea is that looking around and seeing all the good things about the flourishing situations that he witnessed, and also understanding all the flaws in those things, a person should develop samadrishti. What does samadrishti mean? Equal vision. You don't get bent out of shape when somebody looks at you the wrong way, or when you don't get what your mind and senses desire. You don't get bent out of shape. And similarly, you don't get giddy and foolish when somebody praises you, and you don't do stupid things from that point on out of pride or lust, anger, greed, etc. The experiences of this world are intended to bring about this equanimity, to bring us to the stage, as we said earlier, of being like the ocean, very calm, tranquil, full. Full with what?
Wisdom.
Knowledge, yes, wisdom. Okay, so this is a point that Prabhupada dilates on in the next purport. So maybe I should stop here. But if anybody has any questions or any comments, we can discuss those. Yes, Ramrai Prabhu.
Many wonderful points, but I find myself wanting to ask, you were describing in the beginning karma and big karma. It's either one or the other. So for devotees, it's very clear, or it should be clear, our mode of action and thought. Now we're being mandated or entrusted to preach to the fallen population of this age of Kali Yuga. And kind of even that through the Vyasadev's contemplation, you see in the preceding chapters, he was contemplating what would be best. And Vyasadeva, when Narad Muni comes after he's feeling despondent, there's a famous verse, Chikutsitam, this is rarely condemned, you have encouraged people. The people are naturally inclined to enjoy, and you have encouraged them in that way in the name of religion. This is verily condemned and is quite unreasonable. So we try to dovetail or adopt certain things. There's the encouraging verse from the other side. The devotees of Lord Chaitanya exhibited expert dexterity in this regard. I forget the exact verse, but Prabhupada says in the purport. And they are thinking of novel ways and means to inject Krishna consciousness into the dust-born minds of the materialistic society. Such activities the devotees can bring about very, very encouraging, revolution, etc., upgrade the human society. So basically there's what is the difference between innovation and deviation?
Okay, well that's a very general question. A general question will produce a general answer. We have to adopt the epistemology. Epistemology is a big fancy Latin word that means pramana. Pramana means how you know what you know. When I was in college, they taught us that philosophy is concerned with four things: what is true, what is right, what is beautiful, and how you know. How you know is that branch of philosophy called pramana or epistemology. And as we've heard from Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita, well, and more particularly from Srila Prabhupada in his purport to chapter 17, text number 15. Anybody know what I'm thinking of? You have to regularly recite the Vedic literature, Krishna says. This is the austerity of the tongue. But Srila Prabhupada takes it just a step further, and he points out that if we are speaking in spiritual circles about spiritual life, there's a process for that. And that's that we have to immediately back up anything that we propose with reference to Shabda Pramana. And Shabda Praman comes down to us in three forms: Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. They have to all be on the same page. And if we're going to make an assertion about spiritual life, any kind of proposition in devotional service, then we have to explicitly refer to these authorities, as in fact Srila Prabhupada does throughout his books. Why is it that even when he is translating the 10th canto, Srila Prabhupada is still quoting in full verses such as Dehinosmin yatha dehe komaram yovanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namohyati, and giving the full translation also? Why does he do this again and again and again and again and again and again and again? if not to set the example for us that this is how you preach. This is what you have to do. I mean, we also get benefit just from hearing that transcendental vibration, there's no doubt. But the point is, Shruti Smriti Puranadi Pancharatri Vidhim Vina Aikantiki Herer Bhakti Utpatayava Kalpate. That means so-called devotional service that does not explicitly refer to the Shastras upon which it's presumably based, then that just causes a disturbance in society, and we see this. Is that an acceptable answer? It's a general question. I gave a general answer. I have seen, Srila Prabhupada saw, even in the 1970s, Srila Prabhupada complained that devotees do not read his books enough. He used to always say, you think that the books are for distributing, not for reading. We have to read the books also. And I've seen that this problem is much worse in 2019 than it was in 1979. So, there are places, it's just astonishing. Devotees, initiated devotees, they still have Sai Baba on their altar.
Oh, no.
Yes, I've seen this.
Oh, Krishna. That's hard.
One congregational member, coming to ISKCON programs for some time, she raised her hand at the end of a class and asked, is abortion okay in Krishna consciousness?
Oh, my God.
This is what happens when you don't read Prabhupada's books. And when you set, policies and legislate certain standards, within the society, but they're not explicitly based on Shastra, then it causes problems. So this is an important thing. Books are the basis. Yes, preaching is the essence. But what is the basis? Books. You take away the books, everything finished. It is our only saving grace. Krishne swadhamo pagate dharma jnanadibhisaha kalo nashtra drishamesha. Have you lost your vision because of Kali? If so, this is your light. It's like the sun. And we have the Bhagavatam by the divine grace of Srila Prabhupada. I like to point out that I read many editions of Bhagavad Gita before I joined ISKCON. There are many English editions of Bhagavad Gita, or any of these other books. Same principle is there. But I didn't understand the Bhagavad Gita. I was actually taken aback a little bit when I first encountered Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. Why? What is the name of Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita?
As it is.
So I thought, well, who does he think he is? What do you mean, as it is? What about all the other, there's so many editions. Well, why this one, as it is? But then I read it. When I read the other editions of Bhagavad Gita, I didn't understand them. When I read Prabhupada's edition, I understood everything very clearly, just like somebody turned on the lights. So, we are so fortunate we should not take it for granted, because, it is the only thing keeping us afloat is Srila Prabhupada and his books. All right, I'm kind of, yeah.
So, are there instances and examples of acharyas implementing or instituting anything in the Sampradaya that is not explicitly based on Guru's Kali and Shastra? And if there are certain instances, how do we understand them? And can such instances happen in the future?
Well, this is the point that I'm making.
Yeah.
I mean, there are 13 or 14 deviant so-called Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradayas in Bengal. Why do you think that on nearly every other page of Srila Prabhupada's books, he's attacking this virtually unknown sect of the so-called devotees called Prakrita Sahajiyas? Because we have the tendency as well. It's a universal tendency. It's not just some, obscure sect in West Bengal, or 13 obscure sects in West Bengal. What do those sects have in common? They're all throwing away the Shastra.
Hare.
And this is why they deviate. This is why they can have Ras Leela with somebody else's wife. This is why they can smoke ganja after the kirtan, And there's absolutely, to answer the second part of your question, there's absolutely nothing to prevent such deviation from happening in ISKCON except for this book or all the other books that Prabhupada gave us. While the whole world slept, he was working hard, writing these books for whom? Only for everyone in this room.
Yeah.
and for everyone in every other room, for your information. So, I mean, God forbid, but there is a possibility, unless we emphasize the importance of Srila Prabhupada's books, that after the Sunday feast you can swing by McDonald's.
Oh, Lord Chaitanya.
It can happen. So, this is the point. It has to be taken very, very seriously. You raising your hand?
Sometimes we read Narad Muni is described as sadhana siddha or nitya siddha. Which one is it? How do I understand that?
Well,
Because we hear again these mentions in the
yeah. I mean, the real thing is that we talk about a sadhana siddha as opposed to, say, kripa siddha or nitya siddha. The more you think about it, or at least the more I think about it, the more I see there's only one kind, and that's kripa siddha.
Hare Krishna.
You may get the kripa by following your sadhana very carefully. That's okay. Or you may get the kripa without doing anything. Or you may be, by Krishna's kripa, you may be eternally liberated. But either way, it's kripa. So, if you're asking which of these categories does Narad Muni fit into, I don't know. I can't answer the question. But the question is kind of, moot at a certain level at least. Is that okay? Yeah.
You're talking about samadrishta in the end of your
Yeah, samadrishti.
Sometimes
Sridhar Swami brought that up.
yeah, on book distribution it's really hard to be samadrishta. So it's like it really tests your
Therefore, this passage is an ideal one for the Sankirtan devotees. On Sankirtan, when you go on Sankirtan, you encounter anything and everything under the sun.
Exactly.
You have no way to tell what it is. I've had people try to kill me. I've had people try to seduce me. I've had people try to rip me off. Anything can happen. Anything. I've been in places I've been spat upon and abused in so many ways. In places I've been worshipped by thousands of people. This is why, Krishna, these things are not happening by chance. This is the point. Once you put yourself out as a representative of Srila Prabhupada and a foot soldier on the front lines of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Sankirtan movement, you can expect to have anything come at you because it's orchestrated by whom? Krishna only. So do not feel threatened by Maya, because these things are not coming from Maya. They're coming from Krishna. And if they're coming from Krishna, then I have my orders, and along with my orders comes the potency to fulfill those orders if I want to. So, there's no danger for a Sankirtan devotee. You are in the most protected, Prabhupada said, you are in the most protected position in the material world performing Sankirtan. It looks dangerous. To the mind and to the senses, it is dangerous. But there's actually no danger because you're in the lap of Srimati Radharani. It's no problem. Is that okay?
that's the perfect.
All right.
Best thing ever.
Anything else? Okay, so then we can stop here. Oh, you had another?
Here's one nice quote, if you'd like to read it.
Okay. This is from a letter to Lalit Kumar, 27th of November, 1971. Many fanatic spiritual movements have come and gone, but without the flawless philosophy of Krishna, they cannot stand. Therefore, I want especially that my books and literature should be distributed profusely. This is our substance, real philosophical information, not some weak sentiments. So try for this, to give all men this Krishna philosophy, and many real devotees will come with us, back to go home, back to Godhead. Now, I will point out to this, if you don't do this, then who's going to come instead of the real devotees? The fanatics and the people, when you preach, I was thinking when I came here yesterday, my initial impression of this place is, this is exactly what a Hare Krishna temple was in 1974. Identical. It's like a time warp.
That's right.
A very simple program, very essential program, but spiritually elevated program. And, you know, you'll be tested, because when you preach purely and directly, simply like this, then automatically Krishna will send the fruits of that preaching in the form of people, men, money, influence, etc. So the karma and gyan will accumulate. These are called bhakti unmukhi anarthas, if we're attached to them. I believe it or not, because it's punya shravana kirtana, bhakti itself actually does produce anarthas.
Oh.
And you know, so we will be tempted by that. Now once a temple or a project becomes so big, then we find that the people who are attracted to it, they're no longer attracted by Krishna, they're attracted by the karma and the gyan. And once you let those people in, then your whole program is threatened. So you have to be very careful. Now, and Prabhupada is kind of, you know, in between the lines, he's indicating this. And, you know, believe it or not, there are some places I've seen, even in this movement, where you're not encouraged to read Srila Prabhupada's books until you read all the books of the local authority. I've seen that happen. So that's very dangerous also. Very dangerous.
What's the danger of such a thing?
You don't really, who are you asking for? Well, I mean, we've just been discussing for the last 10 minutes now. We just heard what Srila Prabhupada said. Guru mukha padma vakya chitete koriyaika arana kori homani asha. Do you believe it?
Yes.
Or you only sing it? If you really believe it, then read Prabhupada's books. We don't really believe it. That's the problem. Okay? Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Mukunda Datta Prabhu
Ki Jai.